My son stood at the microphone at his own wedding, glass raised like he was christening a ship, and said the words that gutted me clean. I'm letting go of the Rourke name tonight. It's held me back too long. And to make that possible, I need my father to help us secure a fresh start, an $820,000 mortgage on our new home. He slid a thick envelope toward me in front of 180 people. The music stopped. Forks froze midair. Someone at the next table whispered, Is this part of the speech? The room felt like a stalled engine, the kind that coughs twice, then dies. And my son, Daniel, smiled like he wasn't detonating the whole damn family in a ballroom. He didn't look nervous, not even embarrassed, just polished, the way a salesman looks right before he closes a deal he thinks he deserves. I remember the chandelier buzzing overhead, the scent of expensive flowers I couldn't pronounce, and my palms sweating the way they do when a stripped bolt refuses to turn. My ears rang so loud I barely heard the last part. Dad, the down payment is already calculated. I just need your signature. Claire, his new wife, rested a hand on his arm. She wasn't smiling, not really. Her jaw tightened, lips flat, like she was bracing for impact. Her father, Everett Beaumont, the type of man who irons his shoelaces, folded his arms, watching me like I was a stubborn customer refusing an upsell. And Daniel, my boy, stared at me like this was all perfectly reasonable. That's what stung worst. Because I knew that look. It was the same one he used as a teenager when he wanted to convince me something wasn't his fault. The crooked grin, the raised brows, the quiet plea of don't make this harder. It was the look of someone already counting on my yes. I didn't give him one, but I didn't storm out either. I just sat there, hands trembling, heat crawling up my neck. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My own son had turned me into a public obstacle. A mechanic in a room full of people who saw grease the same way they saw mold. Something to hide or scrub off. He went on with the speech anyway. Of course he did. Daniel always knew how to keep a crowd from seeing the cracks. Dad's always been a hard-working man, he said, scanning the room like a politician. But the Rourke name, it doesn't fit where Claire and I are heading. There it was. The real cut. Not the money. Not the mortgage. Not the spectacle. The name. My name. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. I think it was Marcus, one of the old mechanics who taught Daniel how to patch a radiator leak back when Daniel still cared about things that didn't come with leather upholstery. He was seated beside his wife, shaking his head, muttering, "Damn kid." Claire's mother dabbed her eyes, but whether from joy or mortification, hell if I knew. And I just sat there, blinking, trying to steady the shaking in my jaw. I wanted to stand up and yell. I wanted to throw the envelope back. I wanted to walk out and never look back. Instead, I felt my heart thudding like a misfiring piston. My vision blurred around the edges. The room tilted a little, enough to let me know this wound wasn't clean. The envelope on the table had weight, heavy like a brake drum. I could feel it staring at me even after Daniel moved on to thanking the caterers. He didn't look my way again. Not once. I don't remember leaving the ballroom. My legs carried me out like they were acting on instinct, not permission. The cold air slapped me hard when I hit the porch. My hands were still trembling, not from age, but from humiliation. Outside, I finally exhaled the breath I'd been holding through the entire damn ceremony. You'd think that's when the memories would come, the childhood years, the business, the long nights at the shop. But they didn't. Not yet. What hit me first was the sound of Elaine's voice, faint, the way it gets when I'm overtired. "Thomas, don't let pride shove love out of the room." Her handwriting flashed in my head, curved, patient letters she wrote on the sticky notes she used to plaster around the shop. "Hang in there. Lunch in the fridge. Proud of you." God, I could almost smell her perfume for a second. Lavender and machine oil. A strange mix, but it was hers. Grief doesn't knock. It barges in. I leaned on the porch railing to steady myself. My breath shook. Humiliation and grief were two blades digging in at once. Only after the shaking eased did the memories start filling in, one by one, like somebody cracking open drawers I'd kept shut. Daniel, 8 years old, sitting on a crate in the garage, swinging his legs, asking why spark plugs mattered. Daniel, 15, wiping his hands on a rag like one of the guys, proud of the engine we rebuilt. Daniel, 22, wearing a suit for the first time, saying he needed something bigger than Harrington, and one I hadn't thought about in years. Daniel lying to his college girlfriend about where I worked, saying I managed a local business, not that I owned a repair shop. Should have seen it coming, I guess. Maybe I did. Back in my truck that night, the envelope still sitting unopened beside me, my heart hammering, one awful thought rattled in my skull. Why would my own son need to embarrass me to get what he wanted? And right behind it, what the hell pushed him this far? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. Whatever drove Daniel to do this was the same thing that was going to tear us apart if I didn't figure it out. I opened the envelope at 4 a.m. because my hands wouldn't stop moving. That's what humiliation does. It makes you busy with anything that keeps your eyes off the wound. Mortgage packet. $820,000 in bold on the front page. Daniel's signature on the line, slanted, cramped. Not the confident script he'd used on high school permission slips. This was impatient, like someone who'd signed too many IOUs. A sticky note tucked under the flap read, "Dad, this is our shot. Don't overthink it." He'd written it fast. The letters ran into each other. Too casual for a man asking another to stake his life. I traced the ink until it thinned beneath my thumb and felt something like cold settle in my gut. I flipped through the pages. There it was, circled in ink. Primary financial guarantor, Thomas Rourke. The circle was messy, the pen pressed hard as if whoever circled it wanted to make sure I saw it. Beside it, in a different hand, tighter, clipped, someone had penciled, required by family trustees. 2 handwriting styles. 2 hands. 2 masters. They, whoever they weren't a polite suggestion. That's when a memory tried to muscle in, but this time I let it work quick. The garage 3 months ago. Daniel in a suit, I under a transmission. He'd flinched when a customer walked in, when grease hit his cuff. He'd smoothed it away like you'd wipe paint off a shirt that could buy a car. He'd asked me, quiet, "What if I can't make it here fit with where I'm going?" I told him, "You don't buy dignity. You earn it." He'd left without answering. I should have asked the right question then. By 9 I was at the shop because metal and motion keep a man from thinking too hard. The fluorescent lights hummed like a heart on the fritz. I hung the mortgage packet behind the counter where I promised myself I'd look at it without feeling sick. That's when Calvin Pierce came in with his pickup, rust like a road map of everything he'd been through. Calvin's seen every version of Daniel, from sticky cookie kid to polished banker. He set his chin on the counter and didn't bother small talk. "You heard," he said. "Everything," I said. Calvin tucked his hands into his jacket pockets and gave me a look like he'd been trying to figure out where to put a bad truth. Everett Beaumont didn't just sit back, Tom. I saw him talking to a broker after the speech. Quiet, quick. I overheard him say, "We'll help him get what he needs, for a price." He tapped the counter. "That man doesn't hand out favors. He arranges outcomes." The words landed heavier than any wrench. "Why would he be involved?" I asked. Calvin shrugged. "Could be estate politics. Could be he wants the Rourke parcel for something big. Either way, if he's helping, there's a machine moving, and gears don't spin without teeth." He paused. Also, folks at the reception said Daniel looked strained. Not like a man buying a house. Like a man being pushed to. Calvin left then, and the shop felt smaller, like the roof had dropped an inch. I went to the bench and knocked a box of sockets with an angry sweep of my arm. They clattered off the wood, skittering across the concrete. My grip had slipped. For a second, I watched a socket roll under the bench and felt like I might as well have watched my life slip under there too. I nearly said something. My son wouldn't. Then the words got stuck behind my teeth. I remembered Elaine at the table, paper-thin laugh, writing notes with a blue pen. "Teach him to build, not to beg," one said. Her handwriting was careful. I'd kept that note for a reason. I went back to the packet. There was another clue. A thin, folded page slipped between the loan disclosure sheets that wasn't part of the mortgage. A payment schedule for some unfamiliar account, stamped with a creditor's name I didn't recognize and a due date that had already passed. The digits were black and final. Someone had tried to cover tracks by tucking it inside the bigger folder. Whoever did it wasn't careful. My hands shook. I poured coffee and forgot to turn off the gas. The kettle hissed and then went quiet. I'd been the kind of man who kept promises with a handshake and a workbench. I'd paid for Daniel's college with overtime and mortgage decisions that had kept roofs over our heads. For the first time in a long time, I felt the construction of my life creaking under someone else's weight. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, because answers at that moment felt like acid. 30 seconds of recorded clarity. A woman's voice with a calm that made my teeth ache. Mr. Rourke, this is regarding loan application number 0054021. Our records show a primary financial guarantor listed as Thomas Rourke. Please contact our office immediately to confirm. This is time-sensitive. Time-sensitive. The polite word for urgent. My stomach dropped like a car off a jack. Then a second vibration. A text from an unfamiliar short code. Final notice. Account 4021. Immediate guarantor confirmation required. 48 hours. I read it twice until the letters blurred. Daniel wasn't asking me for money. He was asking me to step into a machine. He wasn't asking me to help him buy a house. He was asking me to take the fall if the gears stopped turning. I folded the mortgage packet carefully and set it on the bench like I was landing a heavy part into place. My hands steadied for a second. Then I realized they were steady because I had to be, not because I wasn't terrified. He wanted me to be his shield. And shields rust. I didn't need the voicemail a second time. I knew exactly what primary financial guarantor meant. I'd seen enough customers wreck their lives with a careless signature. That title gave a bank permission to treat me as the one holding the rope. And when the borrower slipped, the rope tightened around my neck instead. If Daniel listed me without consent, that wasn't a mistake. That was a crack in the whole structure. I didn't sit and dwell on it anymore. Anger had already done its job. It opened the envelope. Fear came next. It pushed me to find the truth, not wallow in it. By mid-morning, I was sweeping the bay floor even though it didn't need sweeping. My hands needed a job that wasn't trembling. The shop door chimed. Not Everett Beaumont. Thank God. Not Daniel either. It was Maya Dunn, dropping off brake pads with her usual quick steps. But she wasn't humming like she always did. She set the box down and looked at me the way people look at someone who's been knocked over by a slow-moving car. My cousin bartended at the Beaumont wedding, she said, voice quiet, eyes sharper than usual. He told me a banker cornered Claire's mom for a few minutes. He only caught bits. Something about funding gaps and ensuring commitment before the quarter closes. She shrugged. He said the tone was tense, like a deadline nobody wanted to name. Funding gaps. Deadlines. Quarter closes. Not family talk. This was investor talk. She kept going, softer now. Tom, the Beaumonts deal with quiet money. Old money. The kind that doesn't ask twice. There it was, the extra line she needed to say. Something that wasn't gossip. Something more like a warning. I nodded, but the floor felt a little uneven under my boots. You need anything, she added. You ask. Then she left, giving the shop one last look like she expected someone else to walk in after her. For a while, I worked in silence. I swapped an alternator, cleaned the belt housing, checked a misfire. Regular jobs. Tasks with steps and torque specs. But every time I reached into the engine bay, that circled line from the mortgage packet glowed in my mind. Primary financial guarantor, circled twice, by two different hands. Daniel's shaky ink. A second, firmer pencil note, required by trustees. Trustees meant oversight. Oversight meant obligations. Obligations meant debt, not the simple kind. The kind that belonged in boardrooms, not garages. Around 3, I cracked. I slammed the hood shut harder than I meant to, pain shooting up my shoulder. A socket rolled off the card and clinked across the concrete. I didn't even reach for it. I just stood there, breathing hard, feeling something inside me slip, the way a stripped screw suddenly gives way. I almost said out loud, my son wouldn't pull me into. And the words died before they left my mouth. Because the truth was, he already had. There was one memory I couldn't avoid anymore. And this time I let it hit fast to keep it from drowning me. 6 months earlier, at Greystone Cafe, Daniel sat across from me in a suit that made him look older than he was. He kept checking his phone like he was waiting on a verdict. He said he'd made an investment through people who handle opportunities. Every word came out rehearsed. Every laugh was hollow. When I asked who these people were, he said, Dad, it's nothing shady. It's structured. Structured. Nobody uses that word unless they're already in trouble. His leg had bounced under the table. He'd stopped only when Claire walked in, placing a hand on his shoulder like a brake lever. The flashback broke there, short, sharp, because I couldn't afford to linger. By late afternoon, the shop felt too small to think in. I locked the door and drove toward the Beaumont estate. I didn't even know what I hoped to accomplish, probably nothing smart. I just needed to see the place where this pressure came from. The estate sat behind stone pillars and ironwork gates. As I approached, one gate was half open and a groundskeeper truck crawled through. I almost turned around. My instincts told me any man with common sense would. But I killed the engine and sat there, undecided, sweat dampening the steering wheel. My pulse felt like vibrating metal. Finally, I stepped out. I didn't cross the street. Just stood there, half in shadow, watching the windows. That's when Everett Beaumont stepped onto his balcony, phone at his ear, pacing like a man negotiating the price of someone else's spine. He wasn't calm. He wasn't polite. His hand cut through the air in sharp, impatient movements. Then he stopped, turned, saw me. Not a long stare, just a jolt, like recognition. He muttered something into the phone and vanished inside. 10 seconds later, a black SUV rolled down the driveway. Same dealership decal as the luxury cars Daniel used to brag about. Same metallic paint I'd seen on Beaumont security vehicles at charity events. It crept past my truck. Windows tinted. Engine too quiet for its size. A faint radio crackled inside. Security chatter, clipped and professional. The SUV didn't stop. Didn't accelerate either. Just made sure I saw it. A nudge. A reminder. A quiet go home. So I did. Back at my kitchen table, I spread the mortgage packet out again. I didn't ask myself what Daniel had done anymore. The question was dead. What replaced it was colder, clearer. Daniel wasn't running from the Rourke name. He was running from a debt structure that owned him. And someone in the Beaumont machine expected me to plug the hole before it burst. I wasn't just being asked to help my son. I was being drafted. And part 4 of this mess was already heading my way fast. I poured coffee like a man performing a ritual, one hand steady, the other jittery. I took a sip, let it be real for a second. The shop smelled like old oil and new worry. For 10 seconds, I let the normalness sit there, soft and ordinary, like a paper towel on a greasy bench. Then the phone rang. Mr. Rourke? The woman said, professional and flat. Monroe and Walker Capital calling. We're the mezzanine lender on the file tied to application 005-4021. We require guarantor confirmation by end of business. Failure to confirm may result in escalation to recovery services. Mezzanine. Bridge. The kinds of outfits that sit between banks and the kind of people who sell stability as a product. They weren't small time. They didn't call to remind you to pay a bill. They called when someone's exposure could be turned into someone else's asset. The line hummed like a live wire. I steadied the receiver, breathed, and told the woman I would call back. That call should have landed me on the floor. Instead, I folded it up into a neat packet of anger and moved on. Method first, panic later. The kettle hissed again. I turned off the burner. A knock at the door. Marcus Dalton stepped in, face lined harder than usual. He had a wedding program in his hand, one corner damp from sweat. Tom, he said, I don't usually bring this up, but I grabbed the program because my wife dropped hers near the buffet and I was walking back to hand it to her. That's when I saw Daniel hand something to Everett. He mimed the motion, quick, furtive. They made it look like a nothing, sliding it like you slide a napkin. I only noticed because I was picking up the program and I was right behind them. That explained the timing. Marcus was in the right place for the wrong reason, and that made it believable. What did it look like? I asked. White paper, folded twice. Not an envelope. He handed it back like you hand someone a receipt you don't want in your pocket. Marcus rubbed his jaw. Tom. Daniel looked like a man who'd swallowed a bad joke. Everett looked like a man who'd written the punchline. Marcus left me the program and drifted out. The clack of his boots was like a metronome. I felt the crowd at the wedding shift again in my head. Private transactions where smiles hide the terms. I almost reached for the packet of mortgage papers, then thought better. Instead, I locked up the office and drove toward Daniel's apartment. If there was one place I could see the mess without lawyers or slick men in suits between us, this was it. Up close, messy, human. On the way, my phone buzzed. Daniel calling. I let it ring once, twice. My legs tightened. Dad, he said, voice thin. Talk, I said. Short. Sharper than I meant. Monroe and Walker called me this morning. They're already asking questions about guarantors. He exhaled, a sound like a man who'd been holding breath for too long. I tried to stall, but Everett's been moving things. He wants proof of commitment because his people want assurance before they close an acquisition. A car horn blared in the background, someone shouting. Daniel's voice hitched. A shout, a muffled male voice yelling for him to pick up. Call me back. The line clicked and went dead. Not symbolic. Real. A colleague at his office calling. An urgent interruption that forced the call to drop. I listened to the silence and realized the timing was immaculate. Monroe and Walker on one end, Everett maneuvering on the other, Daniel squeezed between. Dad. He finally texted 2 minutes later. 3 words I'll carry. I'm so sorry. There it was, the human break in the armor. The sound of my boy, not the polished banker, but the kid who once handed me a greasy wrench with a grin and said, "We fixed it, didn't we?" When I got to his building, the hallway smelled like restaurant grease and laundry detergent. His door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and found a living room half-packed. Suitcases, a stack of bank statements, a coffee mug with lipstick on the rim. Papers were scattered across the dining table. I didn't need to look long to see the kind of documents that matter: credit notices, an account statement with a collection mark, handwritten notes with dates and numbers. A cheap landlord sticker on one envelope bore the logo of a private security firm I'd seen patrolling construction sites, the kind Beaumont contractors used. My hands went numb. The reality was worse than the mortgage packet made it feel. There were notices in small print about interest accrual, mentions of a bridge facility, and scribbled names I didn't recognize. I thought of what Marcus said, Daniel handing Everett a folded white paper. I thought of the SUV. I thought of the voice from Monroe and Walker telling me recovery services could be deployed. I picked up the nearest statement. A past due notice. A phone number. A 2-hour confirmation window from Monroe and Walker buried in my inbox like an ambush. My first move was simple. Call my lawyer, Tom Bradley. If I was going to dig into this, I wanted the man who'd incorporated my business at my shoulder. I punched speed dial and listened to the rings like a countdown. Bradley picked up on the 3rd ring. Sam, you sound rough. A mezzanine lender called, I said. And my son put my name on something I never agreed to. I need you at the shop in an hour. There was a pause. Get anything, he started. Bring whatever you need. Bring your files. And Tom, don't let anyone touch those statements. He swore softly and said he'd be there. I hung up and stood in my future son's living room for a long time. The evidence spread like spilled oil between us. Outside, a car slowed at the curb and the driver's head turned my way. The car pulled off, but one thing had changed. The machine wasn't anonymous anymore. It knew where to push. I slid the mortgage packet back into my jacket, locked Daniel's door, and walked out feeling less like a man under a load and more like a man who had to decide which part of the structure to cut loose. 2 hours on the clock. Partners on the way. A machine circling. I started the truck. 30 minutes after Daniel's call, the shop felt like a machine with a missing bolt. The fluorescent light above the workbench hummed like a warning. I kept running my thumb along the edge of the mortgage packet because tools give me a rhythm when my head wants to run away. My phone buzzed. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Tom. Bradley's voice came through like a man who'd already seen the worst and kept going. Listen, I skimmed the statements you dropped off. This isn't just a missed payment. It smells like a bridge facility rolled with mezzanine capital. If Monroe and Walker's on it, they're looking to accelerate. Accelerate how? I asked. Bradley's pause was the kind that asked me to breathe. He said, they can demand guarantor confirmation and, if not satisfied, initiate recovery. But that takes paperwork and leverage. Why the rush? Because Beaumont's acquisition window closes tonight. If Everett wants that parcel or to move the deal, he needs certainty on risk before the books lock. That was the hurry, not corporate melodrama, but the calendar. A quarter closing can turn a slow squeeze into a smoking collapse in hours. 40 minutes? I whispered. I can move faster, Bradley said. I'll be at your shop in 40 minutes. But Tom, he said the name low, careful. You need to understand what you'd be stepping into. This isn't a family favor. It's legal exposure. He hesitated, then added, bring everything. And don't sign anything until I'm there. His small hesitation made him human. He wasn't the kind of man who scared easy. He was the kind who read contracts and kept quiet until he could talk sense. That pause meant the papers were worse than he'd expected. I hung up, feeling the old reflex kick in. When a pulley goes wrong, you don't think. You look, you steady, you fix. Decisive work keeps you alive in shops, and sometimes in life. That's how I get through this. Before I could move, my phone buzzed again, Daniel calling. I picked up. Voicemail. 3 rings and the machine answered with his voice, breathless. Dad, Can't talk. Meeting. We need. I'm sorry. Call me back. Voicemail. Not a dropped call this time. Deliberate. He couldn't talk. Either he was under pressure or he was protecting someone. It didn't feel like protection. I stuffed the mortgage packet and the scattered statements into a folder and slammed the shop door shut. The cold air hit me like a slap. The street outside tasted like diesel and winter. I locked the office, grabbed my keys, and hopped in the truck. I drove slow, head pounding, but my hands were steady. The same hands that tighten a bolt when the machine threatens to fall apart. Bradley would be there. I'd bring him everything. We'd figure out if this machine could be turned apart without losing a limb. I hadn't made it 3 blocks when I saw the sedan. Same make and low-slung profile as the SUV that had passed my truck the other night. Same dealership decal faint on the bumper. It idled 2 houses past mine, headlights off but brake lights suddenly flashing, one bright, then off, then flashing again like a warning light. The driver's window cracked, and a muffled voice, radio static and clipped tone, called numbers and addresses. The car rolled forward a foot, then another, the way something testing the road does. I slowed. The sedan's movement felt deliberate, a measured push with a gloved hand. They were following patterns now. Not stalking me exactly, but making sure I saw them. That little forward creep, a car inching closer, is how you stop a man before he runs. I kept driving. My hands went white on the wheel for 1 block, then relaxed. If they wanted to spook me, they picked the right trick. If they wanted to stop me, they were going to have to try harder. Bradley was there within 20 minutes, standing in the door with that file carrier he'd had since before I owned a decent coat. He frowned when he saw my face. "Tom," he said blunt. "Let's see it." We settled at the bench. He read the statements slowly, eyes flitting between numbers like someone reading a wiring diagram. "Bridge loans are temporary jacks," he said finally, using a mechanic metaphor I understood. "When done right, they support. When abused, they collapse. Mezzanine debt sits on top like pressure plates. If the borrower fails, the plates shift control to the lender." He tapped the page where Monroe and Walker's notice was stamped. "They're not bluffing." "Everett?" I asked. Bradley pursed his lips. "If he's moving to close an acquisition tonight, he wants certainty. If he asked for a guarantor or collateral, that's leverage, and that explains the handoff Marcus saw. But I can't prove he's coordinating until we see a chain. Trustee notes, communications, that white paper." "So we get that chain?" I said. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. "How long?" Bradley looked at the clock. "Long enough to ruin a man if we stall. Short enough that Everett can close the window if we don't move fast." Outside, the sedan rolled past again. This time the brake lights flashed twice in a pattern I knew. 2 beats, then pause. The same beat I'd seen in the SUV. Pattern matched. Bradley snapped the folder shut. "We go to Daniel's bank records first. Then trustees. I'll call a favor at the county clerk's office. If Everett is making moves, there'll be filings. Bring me any contact numbers you have for Beaumont's people. And Tom," he looked at me straight, "don't confront anyone alone." I wanted to argue. I wanted to go smash the lights at Beaumont's house and drag Everett out by his cufflinks. But the mechanic in me remembered torque and tension. You don't yank on a stressed bolt. You relieve the pressure in order. Brute force breaks things. "Okay," I said. "We move smart." Bradley nodded, already dialing. He sounded more confident than I felt. I laced my coat tighter and reached for my keys. 40 minutes to filings, a machine circling the shop, and the kind of leverage that could sell a man's name to the highest bidder. We stepped out into the cold, and the sedan lurched forward a fraction, as if someone inside had decided it was time to remind us they were watching. That small motion felt like a starting pistol. We got in the truck. I drove slow because I wanted the thinking to catch up with me. Slow gets you longer looks. Longer looks let you notice details that make a machine stop pretending it's harmless. The lot on the edge of town used to be nothing: scrub brush, a couple of busted fence posts, the kind of place kids dared each other to sneak into. Now there were stakes in the ground and surveyor flags like bright teeth. A chain-link fence threaded the property. A sign nailed to rotten wood read Hayes Development, Fairview Ridge, future mixed use with a developer logo I didn't recognize at first. I parked on the shoulder and killed the engine. The truck settled like a man finally allowed to hold still. The air tasted of wet concrete and something chemical, the faint tang of fresh asphalt and diesel. My chest tightened. The rumble of a generator somewhere made the ribs of my truck vibrate under my feet. I looked at the sign again. The logo had a partner line beneath it. Greystone Capital, Project Backstop. I almost missed it. Greystone, the same name Bradley mentioned. The same private outfit that had called me 2 mornings ago. Classier and quieter than Monroe and Walker, but not Kinder. There's a thing about spotting a logo on a fence. It changes your idea of coincidence into evidence. I stood there a long minute listening to the sight, the distant clang of metal, a bobcat moving dirt, men shouting through clenched teeth. My hands found the cold lip of the truck bed and stayed there because my body needed to feel something hard. The first time the sedan appeared, it was almost polite, a dark blur that eased down the road, and then parked a little way off, engine idling like a cat ready to pounce. Same model as before. Same partial plate. RB4. The letters I'd seen in the SUV that passed me outside the Beaumont house. Not a full plate, but enough that a man with too little sleep can connect dots. This was no coincidence. I let my shoulders drop, tasted the metal tang of blood at the back of my mouth from grinding my teeth. I pulled my coat tight, walked toward the gate, and peered through the links. Surveyors waved their arms at machines. A foreman in a hard hat flipped through a clipboard. Nearby, a security truck with Beaumont Protective stenciled on the side sat low, windows dark. A man in a green vest watched me the way a dog watches a stranger on its turf. Alert, bored, ready. There was the hesitation then, the small, human thing that made me breathe out loud. If I walk up to the gate, I expose myself. If I call Bradley from the truck, I invite other ears. If I do nothing, the machine tightens. My palms were steady because they had to be. That steadiness had become its own kind of resolve, the kind that comes the moment a bearing starts to smoke and the motor needs someone to stop the vehicle before it kills itself. I clicked Bradley on speaker and kept my thumb over the phone, listening for 2 rings. Tom, he said. Greystone's name is on the sign. I said without preamble. Beaumont Security's here. There was a pause. Greystone partners with high-level backers, he said slowly. If they're on the ground, it means a purchase or an easement. If the Beaumonts are involved, they either underwriting it or they want control. Control of what? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me he didn't want to state what he suspected out loud. Land, he said finally. Access points. Development rights. And in some deals, they want the local names cleared. They don't buy reputations, they buy the dirt under them. That landed like a dropped lug nut. My jaw clenched. I could have gone back to the truck, called Daniel, tried to get him to answer, begged something out of him like a man used to bargaining for the parts he needed. Instead, I moved closer to the fence and watched. A pickup rolled up slow to the site entrance, windows down. The driver wore the same uniform as the guard, Beaumont green with a crisp patch on the shoulder. The window rolled up in a tiny motion, and the driver's head tilted like a man who explains nothing and expects you to understand everything. They wanted me to back off. They wanted me to feel the edge of control without them speaking. That was the point. I thumbed the phone and tried Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I left a voice like a rope, steady, no tremor. Call me. Now. Don't let them push you. No answer. Bradley said something about timing. The quarter, the filings, the need to lock holdings before the market closes. He suggested we get counsel and a notice to Monroe and Walker to halt confirmation while we verify signatures. Legal hammer, slow but heavy. I let that sit in my head a second, then thought of other practical things. Who to call for a print of Daniel's accounts? Who could pull physical copies of any agreement Everett might have shown him? The whitefold Marcus saw. As I scrolled contacts, the sedan's brake lights flashed twice, not blinking, slow and deliberate. As if to say, we see you. We expect you to move along. It pulled forward a foot and eased to a stop. The driver looked over and gave me the faintest nod, the kind you give to someone you want to unnerve, not greet. People sometimes confuse slow movement for courtesy. It isn't. Slow movement in a car with tinted windows means someone is measuring you. I felt something cold and pure in my gut, planning. Greystone on the fence, Beaumont Security watching, a private sedan marking my headlights. The machine didn't need to shout. I slid the phone into my pocket and walked back to the truck. My palms were gritty with dust. My breath fogged in the cold. I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. Tom, Bradley said from the line, I can be there in 30. But you need evidence. You need something they can't spin. I looked at the fence. At the dirt piled where a foundation might go. At the grease-streaked gate with Greystone's logo. Slow planning is good. Faster moves are better. I'll get what I can, I said. Meet me at the shop. Bring anything on Greystone or Beaumont, whatever you can pull. I shut the truck door. The sedan eased forward again, mirroring me, like a shadow that refuses to be left behind. I locked the door and started the engine. The truck shivered awake like a beast roused. 2 hours to Bradley. 2 hours to legal paper. 2 hours for whatever the machine planned next to show its teeth. I drove back toward town with the chain-link fence shrinking in the rear view, the sedan a steady dot behind me. My hands tightened on the wheel the way hands do when you're threading a stubborn nut. Slow, steady, purposeful. If this was a machine, I'd find the failing part. And if I had to, I'd tear at the housing until it gave. I drove up to the ridge overlooking Harrington because I needed air that hadn't been breathed by lenders, lawyers, or Beaumonts. The wind cut sharp across my face, carrying the smell of pine and cold soil. I stood there long enough for the stiffness in my chest to loosen just a little. The valley below looked peaceful, houses lit like warm bolts on a board, but it didn't fool me. Peace was just quiet before impact. I checked my phone out of habit, half hoping Daniel had called, half dreading he had. Nothing. That silence hurt worse than any threat. I kept seeing him at 11 years old, leaning against my arm, grease on his cheeks, telling me, "Dad, one day I'll build something that lasts." Now he was building a paper cage big enough for both of us to die in. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Different from the earlier ones. Shorter, cleaner, like it came from a private line. I hesitated. A full breath. My thumb hovered before I opened it. "We're aware of today's meeting. Keep your boundaries. No logo. No signature. No bluff." Different from Monroe and Walker's cold professionalism. This felt supervisory. Someone watching the watchers. A hand higher on the ladder. My jaw tightened. I typed nothing. Deleted 4 different replies. The wind picked up, rattling the dry brush behind me. A beat passed, long enough for my pulse to slow, when a second message lit the screen. This one from Daniel. "Dad, please don't make this harder." Just that. No context. No explanation. No timeline. A punch to the ribs. I stared at the words until the ridge blurred. All I could see was the Daniel who used to ask if he could sit on my lap while I steered the truck down our old dirt drive. Kid trusted me like gravity. Now he warned me off like I was the fuse in a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. I clenched my teeth and swallowed the ache. If I let myself sit in that grief too long, I'd freeze. And freezing now was worse than being wrong. I forced my focus onto the papers Bradley had given me. Only one section I hadn't fully absorbed yet, because last time I'd looked at it, my hands were shaking too much. Familial stabilization rider. I'd skipped it earlier in the emotional storm. Now I read it clean. On paper, it sounded like a safety clause. In reality, it was an anchor disguised as a seatbelt. It meant the Beaumonts had to verify Daniel had family-backed liquidity to maintain eligibility in their structured partnership pathway. Corporate garbage. But I knew what it meant in my language. It was a brace holding up a bad structure. And I was the brace. I closed the folder and stared at the ridgeline. If Daniel signed under a clause like that, Everett knew exactly where to apply pressure. And Daniel's text, that wasn't defiance. That was a kid cornered. I tightened my coat and headed back to the truck. When I reached the shop, twilight had settled in. The bay lights cast long shadows against the asphalt. A distant generator hummed from the yard behind the next property, a low, vibrating rumble that never sat right with my nerves. Then I saw it. A black sedan, not the same SUV as before, but unmistakably from the same flock. Same glossy finish. Same muted engine note. Same partial plate sequence I'd clocked in my rear view 2 nights ago. This time it didn't lurk. It glided into the lot slowly, tires crunching gravel like someone grinding their teeth. It stopped parallel to my truck. Window didn't roll down. Door didn't open. But the engine stayed running. A low, steady growl, like a warning that didn't need a mouth. The message was clear now. This wasn't surveillance. This was intimidation. A reminder that they weren't just watching me. They were closer than that. The fluorescent above the bay flickered once, buzzing like it was nervous too. I stepped backward toward the shop door, hand tightening around the folder in my jacket. Daniel's silence. Bradley's urgency. Monroe and Walker. Now the sedan. Every pressure point tightening at once. I needed information, not guesses, not memories. Facts. Hard ones. And there was only one person left who could give them to me before this thing snapped clean through. I locked eyes with the black tint where a driver should be and said it out loud, under my breath. Daniel, I'm coming to you. Not to confront him. Not to yell. To get the truth before someone else decided I didn't need it. The sedan shifted, a subtle lurch forward, maybe 6 inches, just enough for the front tires to crunch again. A deliberate move. A slow nod from a predator. I ignored it, got in my truck, and backed out carefully. The sedan didn't follow, not yet. That almost worried me more. On the road, I gripped the wheel tight. The heater blew weak air on my fingers. I didn't know what I'd find when I reached Daniel. But I knew this. Avoiding him now was more dangerous than facing him. Whatever he was tangled in, the fuse was burning faster. I pressed the gas. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and possibility. People moved in the lobby like they were walking through someone else's life. Careful, distracted, formal. I felt out of place in grease-dark hands and a jacket that had once been brighter. But I had papers, and I had time running like a bleeding gasket. Bradley met me at the security line 2 minutes after I arrived. Ty Askew, breathless, legal pads tucked under his arm. He looked like a man who'd come prepared for a brawl and then found the arena already crowded. They don't like bad publicity, he said under his breath, handing me a sheet. Monroe and Walker runs on private contracts, mezzanine bridge stuff. If their exposure goes public while they're courting investors this quarter, it's ugly. They'll fold if we make noise fast and clean. And Everett? I asked. Bradley looked at me, then at the file. He's not a single cog, Tom. He's got reach. But he's not invulnerable. He's got partners who don't like legal headaches. If we move the right papers and threaten a preliminary injunction this morning, we can make them blink. But Everett will resist. Expect muscle. Good. Resistance. I wanted resistance. If I was going to wade through this, I didn't want it easy. I wanted Everett to have to show his teeth. We filed in the clerk's office. My hands were steady because they had to be. Bradley moved with the confidence of someone who'd turned down bank offers and stood up to town councils. The clerk stamped our emergency motion, and then, as if someone had set a clock, Bradley tapped his watch. 2 hours, he said. They'll have to show cause, or we take the hearing to judge. Monroe and Walker hates court publicity. Everett hates anyone embarrassing the family for the wrong reasons. We hustled back into the sunlight. The quarry of the city hummed in the distance, a sound like construction and consequence. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. Be there. Lobby. Now. He was at the courthouse. He didn't want to be anywhere else. That thought came with a pulse that felt like something inside me loosening. We hadn't started a fight yet, and Everett showed up like a man who'd come to court to negotiate rather than battle. Crisp suit. Expensive watch gleaming like a threat. His jaw was tight. He didn't sit. He paced. When Bradley announced what we'd filed, Everett's face changed. Not a quick surrender. He leaned forward, voice cool. Mr. Rourke, I thought we could resolve this quietly. Quietly. Bradley cut in. You orchestrated a private financing structure that put Mr. Rourke's name onto a guarantor page without his consent. That's not quiet. That's coercion. Everett smiled thin. That's a stretch. Our trustees require assurances. We offered assistance. You offered leverage, I said. My voice was low and steady, like a tool engaging gear teeth. You staged terms so my son felt cornered. He handed you documents in a moment of panic. You turned that into leverage. Heat flushed Everett's collar. He didn't laugh this time. He measured us. You'll need proof. We had proof. The folded pages Marcus had noticed, Monroe and Walker's voicemail, the unpaid bridge statements tucked in Daniel's apartment. Bradley laid them out like bullets. Everett went for the counterpunch. He started naming contracts, timelines, a half-slick proposal about community development synergies. He sounded like a man used to moving whole blocks of a city with a pen stroke. He asked if Bradley understood the reputational cost of a public fight. Bradley nodded. We know, which is why this gets resolved quickly, or it'll be public quickly. Everett's jaw worked. He pulled a phone from his pocket and typed. At least that's what it looked like. His mouth said something tight and small and furious. Bradley watched him, then glanced at me. He's calling partners, Bradley said. He's testing options. That test rubbed against my patience like a rusty file. Everett's arrogance had always been performative. Let him perform. Let him sweat a little. Daniel arrived at my side. "Ty Askew," eyes raw. He didn't bother to stand erect. He looked like the kid who once fell off a bike and wanted someone to hold him up. "Dad," he said, voice breaking. I tried to handle it myself. I dug a hole. I tried to patch it. I thought Everett would be the stair to climb out. But he made the stair into a trap. You could hear it then. Not the jargon, not the pressure, not the money. Just the tiny, honest thing, fear. Movement in his voice like a gear slipping. "This is on me," Daniel said. He sank into a chair, hands twisting. "I'm sorry. I thought if I kept it quiet, I could fix it. I lied about money. I signed things I shouldn't have. I thought if I could get the house, I could breathe again. I couldn't." He started to cry, ugly and real. Not for the mortgage. For shame. For the thing boys feel when they realize the world wants them to be someone they're not. The courthouse hummed like the belly of an engine, but that cry was the thing that busted the tension. It turned negotiation into an ache. Everett's face softened for the slimmest second. Then he remembered how to be a professional predator. We gave Everett space to counter. He pushed one more, trying for a settlement that would have bound Daniel to a long, quiet obligation. Bradley kept bringing the conversation back to the public angle. Investors. Quarter end. Reputation. Finally, Everett's assistant leaned in. A call came in to his earpiece. Everett listened, then exhaled, the muscle in his throat working. He looked at Bradley, then at me. For the first time he hesitated, which was all the leverage we needed. That afternoon Claire came by with the pot roast I'd taught Elaine to make. She didn't wipe her hands on a napkin when she left. She stayed until dusk, helping me clean a workbench like someone learning a language of knots. When their daughter came, small and loud and smelling of milk, they asked me what I wanted to call her. For a long second I said nothing. The shop hummed around us, a familiar engine. "Call her," I said, and my voice cracked on the name. "Call her Elaine Rose, if you like." There was a beat. A small, brave smile from Claire, a surprised chuckle from Daniel, a wetness in my throat I didn't try to hide. Later, when the baby slept and the garage lights went low, I ran my hand over an old toolbox Elaine had brought me the day we started. The steel was warm from a day's sun. The memory of her handwriting on a faded note came back. "You're building more than engines." We'd been nearly ground down by a machine built for profit and pretense. It had come at us sharp as a wedge. We'd pushed back with law, noise, and the messy facts of being human in a small town. That night, with my hands smelling faintly of oil and baby powder, I understood something simple and stubborn. A name doesn't make a man. The work he does, the truth he keeps, and the hands he uses, that's what lasts. I set the wrench down, listening to the quiet. Outside, a city keeps its gears turning. Inside, for once, mine felt true.